Margaret Williams was the epitome of success. In her penthouse apartment in the heart of Manhattan, she lived surrounded by luxuries most people could only dream of. At 45, Margaret was the CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the United States, building an empire with her sharp intelligence and relentless determination. But while her professional life thrived, her personal life told a different story. Ethan Williams, her only son, was the embodiment of squandered privilege. At 18, he lived in a world of lavish parties, designer clothes, and luxury vacations. He drove a car worth more than many people made in a decade, yet he had never worked a day in his life. To him, effort was something other people did. Margaret knew Ethan's behavior was a reflection of her own failures as a mother. Since becoming a widow when Ethan was just 5 years old, she had buried herself in work to escape the pain, leaving her son to be raised by nannies, credit cards, and virtually no boundaries. She tried to compensate for her absence with expensive gifts, but it only created a chasm between them. The breaking point came one evening at dinner. Margaret, tired of watching Ethan disrespect the household staff and speak disdainfully about ordinary people, decided to confront him. "You need to learn the value of hard work, Ethan. Not everything in life is served on a silver platter," she said firmly. Ethan rolled his eyes, pushing his plate away. "Oh, please, Mom. You're a millionaire. Why should I care? Work is for people who don't have a choice." Those words hit Margaret like a punch. She sat in silence for a moment, frustration and guilt bubbling up inside her. Finally, she stood, looking directly into her son's eyes. "That's enough. I won't let you become this kind of person. Tomorrow, you're packing your bags. You're going to Kansas to live with your grandfather." Ethan almost laughed, thinking it was a joke. "You've got to be kidding. Kansas? With that old man in the middle of nowhere?" "I'm not joking, Ethan. Your grandfather George is an honest, hardworking man. He'll teach you what I couldn't." Ethan tried to argue, threatened, and even resorted to emotional blackmail, but Margaret was resolute. She knew she had to stand firm, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, Ethan boarded a plane bound for rural Kansas, furious and indignant. To him, it was equivalent to exile. To Margaret, it was her last hope to save her son from himself. As she watched the plane take off, Margaret felt a mix of sadness and hope. She knew she was sending Ethan to a life he despised, but she also knew that if he could get past the initial shock, he might discover something money couldn't buy: character. Ethan stepped off the small plane at the Kansas airport, his face a mask of disdain. The scene was nothing like what he was used to. No skyscrapers, no bustling traffic, no glittering storefronts, just vast open fields and a silence that felt almost oppressive. His grandfather, George Williams, was waiting in the terminal, a 68-year-old man with a face weathered by time and hands calloused from years of work, but warm eyes that radiated patience. He greeted his grandson with a smile. "Welcome, Ethan. Ready for a new adventure?" Ethan just grunted, dragging his designer suitcase toward his grandfather's rusty old truck. The vehicle, dusty and battered, seemed like a personal insult to his taste for luxury cars. When they arrived at the farm, Ethan realized his idea of hell was about to come true. The house was simple, filled with old furniture and nothing reminiscent of modern New York life. No internet signal, no cable TV, no espresso machine. Just a functional kitchen, a modest bedroom, and the constant sound of nature all around. The next morning, the real challenge began. Before the sun even rose, George knocked on Ethan's door. "Time to get up, kid. We've got work to do." Ethan groaned, pulling the covers over his head. But George wasn't the kind to give up. He opened the windows, letting in the chilly morning air. "Come on, Ethan. The farm doesn't wait for anyone." The first task of the day was feeding the chickens and pigs. Ethan tried to protest, saying it wasn't work for him. But George simply handed him a bucket of feed and pointed to the animals. "If you don't do it, they don't eat. And if they don't eat, we don't eat. It's that simple." The routine was grueling. After feeding the animals, Ethan was taken out to the fields to help plow the land. The sun beat down on him. His hands quickly blistered, and the smell of dirt clung to his skin. He tried to get out of it several times, but George, with his quiet wisdom, persisted. "You think this is hard, Ethan, but this work is what keeps everything running. Someday you'll understand." In the first few days, Ethan rebelled. He pretended to be sick, did his chores half-heartedly, and spent hours complaining. But George didn't budge. He worked alongside his grandson, patiently teaching him every task and sharing stories about how the farm had sustained the family for generations. Gradually, something changed. Ethan began to notice that the people around his grandfather were different. They helped each other, shared meals and stories, and lived without competition or pretense, just a close-knit community. One day, while helping repair a fence, Ethan heard his grandfather say, "Around here, it doesn't matter how much you have in the bank. What matters is how much you contribute." Those words stayed with Ethan. He started approaching the work with less resistance, learning not just how to do things, but why they were important. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight and reward of a hard day's work. In that moment, Ethan began to realize there was more to life than luxury and status. The simplicity of the farm was slowly transforming him. 6 months had passed since Ethan had been sent to his grandfather's farm. During that time, Margaret had kept her contact with him to a minimum, believing that distance was necessary for him to learn independence. She had braced herself for the moment Ethan would call, begging to come home. But that call never came. Curious and concerned, Margaret decided to pay a surprise visit. She wanted to see with her own eyes how Ethan was doing. On the drive to Kansas, she pictured finding her son disheveled, miserable, and ready to admit he couldn't live without the luxury he had always known. When she finally arrived at the farm, she parked her luxury car on the dirt driveway and looked around. The scenery was bucolic and serene, nothing like Ethan's world. Margaret walked up to the house, but before she could knock, she heard laughter coming from the barn. Intrigued, she followed the sound. As she opened the large wooden doors, she froze at the scene before her. There was Ethan, his back to her, wearing simple work clothes, a worn t-shirt, faded jeans, and mud-caked boots. He was tending to a newborn calf with a skill and patience she never thought possible. "Good boy, you're gonna be just fine now," Ethan said softly as he stroked the animal. Margaret let out a small gasp, just enough to catch George's attention. Her father, who was organizing tools in the corner, greeted her with a warm smile and a wave. "Margaret, we weren't expecting you today." Ethan turned around, and for a moment, he didn't recognize his mother. But when their eyes met, Margaret could hardly believe what she saw. The son she knew, always impeccably groomed and perpetually bored, was now smiling, genuinely smiling, in a way she hadn't seen in years. "Hi, Mom," Ethan said casually, disarming her completely. He put down what he was doing and walked over, his hands still dirty from the barn work. Margaret hesitated, looking him up and down. Ethan's hands were calloused, his face sun-kissed, and there was a calm energy about him she had never seen before. "Ethan, you look so different," she said, still in shock. He smiled. "Yeah, I guess the farm did that to me." Throughout the day, Margaret was given a sort of tour of Ethan's new life. She watched him care for animals, cook alongside George, and even lead a small group of volunteers building a shed for a neighbor. "Ethan, are you really in charge of this?" she asked, incredulous. "Yeah, Mom. Around here, we help each other. It's different, but I like it," he said proudly. Margaret felt her heart swell with emotion. The spoiled son she had sent to Kansas was unrecognizable. He had found joy and purpose in a life she never thought he would accept. As night fell, Margaret sat next to George, watching her son play with the farm dog. "You've transformed him, Dad," Margaret said, her voice full of gratitude. George shook his head. "I just showed him the value of hard work and how to respect others. The rest, Margaret, that boy figured out on his own." Margaret drove home that night feeling profoundly thankful. For the first time, She felt hopeful that Ethan was on the right path, and that her drastic decision had been the best thing she could have done for him. The next morning, Margaret sat on the farmhouse porch, a cup of hot coffee in hand. The scent of the fields and the sounds of nature surrounded her in an unsettling yet peaceful way. She watched as Ethan, in the corral, fed the horses with a deftness that seemed impossible for someone who, just months ago, had complained about carrying a backpack. When Ethan walked over, she called him to sit beside her. Still wearing his dirt-streaked boots, he pulled up a chair and sat down, relaxed, as if this life was all he had ever known. "Ethan," Margaret began, choosing her words carefully, "you seem so different. I want to understand what happened. How did you change like this?" Ethan looked at his mother, a calm light in his eyes. "Mom, I didn't know what it meant to be useful until I came here. At first, it was awful. I hated everything. Waking up early, working, even the silence. But over time, I started to notice something. Here, everything I do matters. If I don't feed the animals, they go hungry. If I don't help in the fields, the crops fail. Every little thing I do has a real impact." Margaret stayed silent, absorbing her son's words. He continued, "You gave me everything, Mom, and I'm grateful for that. But I think all the luxury distanced me from reality. I didn't understand the value of things because I never had to work for anything. Here, I've learned what it means to work hard, to rely on others, and to be part of something bigger than myself." Margaret felt a lump in her throat. She had never seen Ethan speak with such maturity. Before she could respond, George stepped out of the house, his calm demeanor and sharp gaze adding weight to the moment. He joined the conversation uninvited, as was his way. "Margaret, you're surprised by what you see, but this could have happened a long time ago," George said, settling onto a nearby stool. "You always thought giving Ethan everything he wanted was the best way to raise him. But sometimes, giving too much is the same as taking away. You took away his chance to discover who he really is." George's words hit Margaret like a punch. She looked away, feeling a mix of guilt and gratitude. "I just wanted the best for him," she said, her voice trembling. "I know, sweetheart," George replied, his tone softening. "But the best for someone isn't always what it seems. Ethan needed purpose. He needed responsibility. Here, he found those things because he didn't have another choice. You gave him comfort, but you forgot to give him the challenges that would help him grow." Margaret felt tears rolling down her face as she listened. Ethan placed his hand over hers, a small gesture, but one full of meaning. "Mom, I know you did what you thought was right, and I don't blame you. In fact, I thank you for sending me here. It was hard at first, but it saved my life." The silence between the three wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that comes with understanding and acceptance. Margaret looked at Ethan, then at George. For the first time, she felt that, despite her mistakes, she had gotten something right. She had given her son the chance to find his own path, even if it meant letting him lose his way for a while. In the days following Margaret's visit, a quiet transformation began within her. For the first time in years, she felt proud, not because of something she had bought or achieved, but because of the man her son was becoming. One sunny morning, as Margaret and Ethan walked through the fields, she asked, "Ethan, now that you've been here for so long, are you ready to come home?" Ethan stopped, pulling off his straw hat and wiping the sweat from his forehead. He seemed to consider his answer deeply before responding. "Mom, I love you, and I'm grateful for everything. But for now, I don't think I'm ready to leave. There's still so much I can learn here, and I feel like I can do more for the farm and the people here." Margaret stared at him, surprised. There was sincerity in every word Ethan spoke. He wasn't just trying to prolong an experience. He was genuinely committed to the new life he had embraced. "If that's what you want, I'll respect your decision," Margaret said, her voice filled with emotion. That afternoon, Margaret joined George and Ethan in the farmhouse kitchen. They discussed the community's needs and how things could improve for everyone. As she listened to the struggles of small farms and the local rural school, Margaret made a decision. "I want to help," she said with determination. "Ethan has shown me that life is about more than status and money. I'm going to make a donation to improve the school, buy equipment for the farmers, and help build a community center. I want to give back to the place that changed my son." George and Ethan were surprised but deeply moved. The next day, Margaret began organizing resources. News of her generosity spread quickly through the small town. She not only made donations but also got personally involved, speaking with locals and listening to their stories. Meanwhile, Ethan continued his journey on the farm. He took on more responsibilities, including leading an irrigation project to improve local crop yields. He also began teaching basic technology skills to the community's youth, using his knowledge to help others thrive. At the end of his second year on the farm, Margaret returned for a celebration hosted by the community to thank her for her generosity. It was a simple event, but full of warmth. Ethan stood on a makeshift stage and, as he looked at the crowd, saw his mother's proud smile. "I want to thank my grandfather, George, for showing me what it means to be resilient and generous," he began. "And I want to thank my mom, who made the hard decision to send me here. It was the best thing she could have done for me. Today, I'm a better person because I've learned to appreciate the simple things and the people around me." Warm applause filled the air, and Margaret wiped away a discreet tear. The next morning, as mother and son said their goodbyes again, Margaret held Ethan's calloused hands. "I feel like I truly know you now, Ethan," she said with a smile. "And I finally feel like someone you can be proud of, Mom," he replied, his voice full of emotion. Margaret returned to New York with a transformed heart. Her connection with her son had never been stronger. She knew that, no matter where he chose to live, Ethan would carry with him the lessons of humility, hard work, and gratitude he had learned on the farm. And for Ethan, the Kansas fields weren't just a place of learning. They were the soil where he found himself and the true essence of what it means to be a family. If you enjoyed this emotional story of transformation and growth, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your participation means so much to us.